Well, howdy. Welcome here to the Double M Farm. Been a little while since I've posted anything. I've been very sick, but I think I'm on the mend, getting on the better side between kidney infections and kidney stones and some other things. Been a rough June, but it's July now, 2022, and I'm feeling much better. I've had a lot of inquiries on the channel about the pond, an update on the pond, and I've had quite a few people ask about how I felt about the process of building this pond with the Harbor Freight towable trencher. So I thought I'd just run through a few quick things of what you can expect if you want to try to undertake a project as large as this with something as small as a towable trencher. What are the pros and cons of doing it with a towable trencher versus a, I don't know, case track hoe, or what we used to call drag lines, the old big excavators. You can tell how old I am when I use that word. But to be perfectly honest with you, I sat at my desk for a little while before starting this film and couldn't really film video. And to be honest, I couldn't come up with a lot of cons. I guess to start with, we'll go with the biggest pro to doing it is the price. I've got $3,000 roughly in my Harbor Freight towable trencher, and depending on which kind of towable trencher you buy, you could have as much as $5,000 to $6,000 in them. But, and again, depending on where you are, if you hire someone, well, first of all, if you go to buy a larger track hoe or even a backhoe attachment or a terramite, anything like that, you're going to spend more than $3,000 to $5,000. Around here, used mini excavator track hoes with a 360 spin are $40,000 to $45,000 used. So definitely price is a definite pro versus con to building one of these things with a towable trencher. The biggest obstacle I had with this pond had nothing to do with the towable trencher. It was the fact that I wasn't digging a dry pond. So a lot of the things I talk about here are probably not going to pertain to anything you may do if you're digging a dry hole that is then going to fill up with rain and runoff. That is a much easier dig than a wet hole. This little pond is spring fed. There's water coming out of the ground in 4 different places feeding this pond. And that's a good thing from the standpoint of no matter how many leaks I get or what kind of drought I have, the pond's always full of water because it's spring fed. The drawback to that is digging in wet, in my case, at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains, not just wet, but heavy mountain clay with a lot of rock. So you have to keep that in mind. That's the kind of area I dug this in. So that leads me to one of the drawbacks to a Harbor Freight or any towable trencher, if you want to call it a drawback, maybe challenge, maybe a better word. One of the challenges to using one of these towable trenchers, and they are called trenchers for a reason because they're basically made to dig a trench in a straight line. And when you do that, you just dig and you can throw the dirt to either side, and when you finish digging, if you want to cover it up, you can rake the dirt back in. That's basically what they were designed for. And if you think about it, that's no different than a tractor mounted backhoe or a terramite. They're the same way. In my personal opinion, a towable trencher digs just as well as a tractor mounted backhoe and is easier to maneuver because with some tractor mounted backhoes, or like the terramite, you can swivel your seat around and drive your tractor forward or around, move it around. But in many of the tractor mounted backhoes, you've got to get off of the backhoe part and walk around and get onto the tractor part to move it. So I find the towable, and I've run every kind in my 68 years, almost 69, I find the towable trenchers to be much easier to maneuver because you just pick it up using the bucket and spin it around. So I do find it easier from that standpoint. But again, getting back to any towable trencher or tractor mounted backhoe, you have the problem of digging the dirt, and then where do you put it to get it out of your way? Well, if you're digging a ditch, that's not a problem. This ain't a ditch. This is a 1/4 acre pond, and goes on around that way. So what you run into is, if I dig and put it here, well, then when I go to dig my next strip, that dirt that I just dug's in my way. Then you say, well, just put it in something and haul it off. That's the perfect solution if you're digging a dry hole. I have a little Japanese mini truck with a dump body. And the main reason I bought it was to help the trencher dig this pond. And the thought was, the way I dug the pond, if you haven't watched any of the videos, is the main spring runs right through there. And that's where I put the spillway, right where the main part of the spring was. So I started on the uphill side. I'd start at the spring and basically dig as wide a ditch as I could dig back this way, throwing my dirt here. Then I'd go back to start my next one, and I'd dig as wide a ditch as I could, making the original ditch wider. And basically just kept widening the ditch, which meant that my outrigger leg on this side was just right on the edge of the ditch I'm digging, the hole that I'm digging. And if you have a dry hole, you can keep your whatever, in my case it was the mini truck, on the uphill side, the dry side, and as you dig, you throw the dirt in that and you haul it off so that when you go to dig your next strip, the dirt's out of your way. I couldn't do that. I thought that's what I was going to do, but with that water constantly running, there was no way to stop it. That's, if you'll look, that's uphill, and behind me is the same way. So there was no way for me to reroute the water from the springs to get it out of my way and keep the hole dry while I dug. So I basically had to dig a wet hole. It was filling up as fast as I was digging it. Now, it didn't fill up. This water is between 6 and 7 foot deep out in the middle. It didn't fill up that much because I didn't build the spillway until I was through and just raised the water that way. But it was still wet. I mean, there was no way to keep it dry. It just kept, as I dug the hole, it just kept spreading. The water did. So it probably stayed about 6 inches to a foot deep. And what that meant was if I drove the little truck in there, it sunk. And one time it did, and I had to winch it out with my Land Cruiser. So that was a huge, not drawback, but a huge, I don't know what word to use. It was something I had to work around. And basically what I did was I would dig the dirt, pile it up out of my way, and then I would have to dig that dirt and move it out of the way before I could dig the next strip. And I just kept doing that. And so that took a lot of time, which is one of the cons of building a pond with a towable trencher. It's going to take a lot more time. But one of the pros is once you're through with it, if you bought a towable trencher to do the project, you still got your trencher. You still got your excavator. So instead of me, I could have paid somebody to come in here and dig this little thing in 2 or 3 days. But then I would have paid him several $1,000s, and when it was done, I wouldn't have had a trencher. So I spent that same amount of money on a trencher, and I've got a pond, and I still got the trencher for all my other projects. So that's another pro. But moving the dirt and the amount of time it took were probably the 2 biggest cons to digging this thing with a towable trencher. And if you've never used a towable trencher, just think about on, say, a track hoe, you've got a 360-degree spin and a longer reach in most cases. You got about a 7 to 8 foot reach with a towable trencher, depending on the brand. But with the excavators on a track hoe, I could spin 360 and throw the dirt behind me. And as I backed up, just keep pushing the dirt out of my way. But again, that's not possible with the towable trencher. So those are really the only pros and cons that I could think of. There's no reason you can't do it. If you want to dig yourself a little pond, if you've got a place and you've got a towable trencher, it can be done. And it works well. You just got to stick with it and be willing to take your time. and you can build yourself a quite nice little pond. And I've probably got, if I worked on it non-stop, I've probably got about 2 to 3 weeks of work, because I'd work on it a couple hours a day for about 3 months. And you see how well the grass is growing on the dam here. The only other problem I've had with this pond, and continue to have, I stocked it with shell cracker and I lost them. A hole developed over on the other side of the spillway there. And the reason it developed, well, first reason, you can see I didn't go far enough with the trees. I need to cut those trees because the roots are going in. On this side, I went further back with the trees that I cut. And the big key, if you've never built a pond, you can watch any video on YouTube and good excavators will show the way to do it. But I came right here and dug a very deep ditch, about 6 to 8 foot deep. Just the width of the bucket, about a foot, a little over a foot wide. Dug a really deep ditch, threw that dirt on this side of the ditch. Then, as I'm digging this last part here, I didn't have to worry about where to put the dirt because I was building the dam. So I threw that dirt in that ditch. What that does is any roots or cavities in the dirt, by digging that ditch and then filling it and packing it with the dirt, as you build it up, that seals it off. So the dam is not only a big earthen dam, but it goes down and is packed below the level of the pond. So any cavities or roots that may have been in there below the water level have been sealed off by digging that trench. And that reminds me, that's another con to building a pond with a towable trencher, is packing. There was no way for me to pack this. If you had built this with a bulldozer or track hoe, you're driving in there. That probably wouldn't pertain to this one because it would have been so wet I'd have probably sunk trying that. But in most dry holes, you drive in there with your track, so not only are you digging a hole, but you're packing it as you dig without even realizing it in many cases. You're packing it and making it solid. Well, you can't do that with a towable trencher. There's no way to drive in there and pack it. And then, whoa, I'm about to fall in the water. The dam on this side, for whatever reason, I don't remember, I forgot to dig a trench. Not only did I forget to dig a trench, I didn't cut these trees far enough back away from the hole. I think I was figuring, you see the curve there, I think I was figuring on it being more here. And then as I dug a little further that way than I intended to. And all I did was I dug and threw the dirt there. So there is no core. There is no ditch dug down below pond level here. So any roots from these trees and any cavities that may have formed down in here were not eliminated because I did not dig that trench, that core. And what happened is you can see a shallow spot right there. A hole opened up there and gushed through underneath and came out there into the lower part of the creek and basically sucked my fish out. I lost pretty much all of my fish when that happened. I got down here one morning and the level was down about 4 feet and the water was gushing right there going under. So I got some bentonite, basically used cat litter, poured in there for it to harden, and then put bags of concrete just still in the bag, just packed them in there to solidify and give a solid wall there. And it hasn't leaked anymore, so we'll see how well that holds up, because eventually I hope to log this and expand the pond on down. But that's the only real problem I've run into, was that leak right there, which lost my fish. So I do have thousands of minnows in here. They won't show up on camera, but they're in there. And left a little island there, and I've got it a little more shallow over there for the fish to bed. And now I'll be stocking it with more fish and adding on to it. I'm going to dig it more out over that way, make that part wider and bigger. And I'm thinking, cut a few of these trees so I have room. I drive through here, cut these trees so I can drive over there, and I may dig this part further this way. If I do that, before I do it, I'm going to go back, cut those trees, and dig a good core, a good deep ditch right there, so that when I dig this, I can throw the dirt in that and not have a repeat of that problem there. But that's an update on the pond. That's my thoughts on using a towable trencher versus an excavator or bulldozer to dig one. Would it have been faster and easier with a big excavator or bulldozer? You darn right it would have been. Would it have been as much fun? No, probably not. I had a blast doing it. I really enjoy coming down here. It's real muddy right now because we had a monster rain the other day. Got it stirred up. All of the water comes down from the uphill and runs a little creek right into the pond. But it's been a fun project, and we've had a lot of fun with it. And I had so many people asking questions about it, I just felt like I needed to throw a video together, and good Lord, I've been talking 15 minutes. So I'll try to get out of here now. I doubt if any of you are still listening, because most people don't like long videos, and I'm one of them. But I appreciate you visiting us here on the Double M Farm, and if you've got any questions about the pond, please ask down below, and I'll try to answer them the best I can. And if you decide to do one, go for it. Worst thing that can happen is you'll wind up with a hole with water in it, and then you'll stop and say, hey, look, I got a pond. Again, I appreciate you joining us, and we'll talk to you again real soon.